Dear audience, welcome to the show POWERchat. In today's episode, we are discussing about the role of media in crisis. Today is the World Press Freedom Day that falls on May 3rd, every year celebrated with a particular theme. This year's theme is Journalism Without Fear and Favor. Joining us today is Mr. Dhruba Hari Adhikary, a reputed journalist, recognized in and outside the country for his contribution to journalism for more than 4 decades. He served with the reputed media outlets including Reuters, the news agency, New York Times, BBC and Time magazine. He also served with the Gorkhapatra publication and corporation. Please allow me to welcome him. Welcome to the show, Mr. Adhikary.
Thank you very much.
How have you been?
I've been well, and given the situation, we are in the midst of a lockdown, so everybody is affected, including journalists. Their accesses, their movements are restricted. So here we are celebrating the World Press Freedom Day. This is pretty difficult time for the media people.
Well, Mr. Adhikary, you served with several media outlets in and outside the country, as I was introducing you. How do you analyze the situation of journalism then and now?
That's a very interesting question. It involves some kind of a comparison. When I started off journalism in late 70s, to be precise, 1978, technology-wise, it was different, completely different from what we have today. It's more easy to work these days. Even for example, those days when I was working for a radio organization, we used to have to carry heavy equipment whenever we went to do an interview outside of the studio. So nowadays we don't talk about heavy equipment anymore. So we have mobiles, we have all kinds of technology handy. Only problem is that you have to have good storage. In those days, communicating, transmitting and spreading word through the existing technological tools were difficult. Now it's much more easier. That's a noticeable part.
Well, that's really interesting, but there is criticism that the content today produced by several media outlets is not up to the quality. There is criticism. How do you analyze the content that Nepali media produces?
Yeah, I was waiting for this question because otherwise I would have started talking about the content side already, but I didn't want to because I anticipated that you would definitely raise a question on this. Well, the content-wise, we are not, when I say we journalists, inside Nepal, outside, universally, we are not working hard enough to get to the facts and collect from the field the materials, the stories, the ideas, the approaches, the issues, the problems, the way they need to be done. It has become a sort of a practice these days to have this copy and paste thing. Several media outlets disseminating the same kind of information. Not only same kind of information, obviously basically facts would be the same, but their tone and style, they also tend to be similar, whereas there is no originality, no individual sort of identity, and that is creating some kind of uncertainty and problem at the output. Like credibility is in the line these days. Credibility, there are quite a few media organizations, outlets, but whom to believe? You cannot make a decision on the basis of reading one particular newspaper. You have to have several newspapers around you.
You are of the opinion that credibility is in crisis.
Yes, it is.
What are the things that you want to praise for Nepali media?
Well, I have to see it in a different angle to praise it, because if there were no media of this kind, whatever exists now, in terms of electronic media, print media, online, all these broadcast, let's think for a minute that the kind of setup we have collectively now, if it did not exist, and we were in the era before 1990, we would be in dark. There would be darkness. So it would be a quite difficult and different situation if we were not existing in this form, even in this form today. So it is shedding light, it is bringing issues. People have to pay attention, even if temporary attention, but when things are said from different directions, people tend to listen, watch. What is this? We have to be careful. And even in the midst of pandemic, this coronavirus pandemic these days, people are listening to radio, watching TV to get new information, whether there is a vaccine being developed quickly enough to lift the lockdown. That is universal everywhere, not only in Nepal, everywhere. So and there is a tendency to find fault. Who started this? Who countered this? Who took timely action and who did not take? What happened in New Zealand or what happened in the United States? Quite different. So people are aware that we have tools, platforms, sources of information.
And that is due to media.
Yes.
And do you see that media in Nepal exposing frauds and wrongdoings of the government so to preserve the hard-earned democracy and media freedom here in Nepal?
That's a good question, relevant question. But I would say that the kind of scandals, kind of irregularities, kind of deficiency that there are reported, they are quite a few, okay, but they are not enough. We have at least 3 times more issues than what are being reported these days. So I'm not terribly satisfied. Nobody should be satisfied for that matter, because there is always room for improvement. The other thing is that the other problem that people do not get facts-based stories these days. There are concocted stories, created, invented. That's how people like Donald Trump are talking about fake news. This is a problem. In our case, in our country, what I see is that this credibility is in the line primarily because media people who are working in different media organizations are not professionally sound, skilled, and non-partisan. That's much more important, because there are people, competent people who can work, but they have suddenly they have found it lucrative to become public relation people of the different political organizations or corporate houses. They are propagandists in a way, not journalists. So they know how to do journalism, but they have gone away from the role they are expected to play, and still pose themselves as journalists and take identity cards and all those kind of things to project themselves as journalists.
Well,
they are
Mr.
not.
Adhikary, that gives some background of the media performance here in Nepal. Today is the World Press Freedom Day that has been marked or celebrated globally since 1993, and this year's theme is journalism without fear and favor. how do you, justify this theme in the context of Nepal? Journalists or media people working with different media outlets here in Nepal, working in line with this spirit. They are free and they are not taking favor of any power centers.
That is quite the opposite of the situation that we have now. The expectation should be that journalists should be working without fear and favor. But what is happening in Nepal is several distortions, and this is one of those things that people are engaged as journalists in different media organizations and also working independently. They are doing some kind of favor to a particular political party or particular organizations, corporate houses, or they fear retribution, they fear isolation from industrial groups, business houses, at times from the bureaucracy, police. There are cases we have been reading in the media lately that because certain persons wrote some kind of observation or comment in social media like Twitter, Facebook, they are being arrested, they are being penalized. So this is also a kind of indication that there is a sense of fear, and fear is the greatest fear. That it involves to self-censorship. People not opening up properly and not telling the facts to the people who
what
are
is the reason behind that? Why media is not able to expose with the wrongdoings of state and non-state actors who they most fear with?
Well, there are state actors these days who are also being fed from, because there are restrictive laws being passed, and also there are tendencies from ministerial levels to publicly issue condemnation of the media. That kind of a thing also contribute. But basically I would say that there is a lack of responsibility, there is a lack of skill, there is a lack of training, there is a lack of responsibility among the journalists themselves. So if they are being victimized for one reason or the other, they have to review their own performance and activities, and there should be a scope for self introspection. If they do the introspection properly, they will find that, well, I can manage individually. Each one of us working in the media can manage that. We can say the truth, reveal the truth, report the facts, but in the meantime become responsible.
Who is responsible for this fragmentation, the division among journalists in different political lines, and how do you observe the role of organizations like Federation of Nepali Journalists and other media rights organizations? Are they in appropriate line reminding the roles and responsibilities of journalists?
Unfortunately not. There are distortions and there are deviations, as I said earlier, because the first thing you mentioned, Federation of Nepali Journalists, for example, there is the umbrella organization. There are several other media-related organizations.
And that claims for having thousands of their
members. Yeah. But are they professionally committed? Are they professionally sound? Professionally skilled, and to be professionally committed also. The commitment, if you have a commitment, and even if you make mistakes on the way, people will believe that you have good intentions. You are professionally moving ahead, but you don't have proper skill and you are affiliated with one or the other political party. Well, some people have, we have read very recently, not very recently, but a couple of months ago, that there was a group of journalists who took oath to work as a party members simultaneously as journalists. This is, well, to use bluntly, if I want to say bluntly, it would be like a ridiculous thing. Journalists taking oath as party workers cannot be journalists at the same time. So these are the kind of things that have undermined the credibility. Ultimately, it has effect on the credibility part.
So it is giving a space to also public to question about the content.
Yes, and there are other organizations like Press Council Nepal, for example. It is supposed to be the regulatory authority for the media,
especially for violation of code of conduct.
Code of conduct. But who are running the show there? The Press Council Nepal itself is not a body to be relied on. The kind of people who are nominated there by the government agencies, they should be the people of high reputation, integration, and ability, recognized by the society. The kind of people running that organization, that agency at the moment doesn't have that kind of a background. So its own credibility is in question. So how can it monitor or give kind of reprimand or punishment to so-called erring journalists? So it is difficult and different. We have, as I said in the beginning, technologically we have moved very far ahead, but content-wise and credibility-wise, we are far behind.
Well, Mr. Adhikary, could you also tell us your observation about the current situation in the world is affected with the pandemic called COVID-19, coronavirus disease, and Nepal is also affected. There are news stories exposed by the media here in Nepal, but there is restriction imposed for journalists for merely publishing stories of the fraud and wrongdoings by the ministry and within the state organs. How do you see the role of media at the time of crisis like pandemics?
Yes, those people, those journalists who are professionally sound and correct, taking correct approach, and working with commitment, professional commitment, they are finding it difficult, obviously, because their movements, physical movements are restricted, and you have to maintain a physical distance as well. You have to, in normal circumstances, you would have gone to the field to do reporting, construction sites, highways, various hospitals. They cannot visit. They have to rely on the information supplied by the spokespersons of different ministries, like Health Ministry and Home Affairs Ministry, Foreign Ministry. There is no possibility, there is no immediate possibility of verifying the kind of information that are officially given. Official informations are, they tend to hide something sometimes, not all the time, but they don't tell the full story as such. Because of their nature, working nature also, but as journalists they have to find additional information, they have to verify the information given officially and mention in the stories that these are the officially verified information and this is independently verified information. And sourcing of the stories are also not properly done. That is also a kind of problem in when we talk in terms of credibility. But going back to the question that that the COVID-19 has created problem, I mean pandemic worldwide, and I have seen institutions like BBC and CNN, they are also doing reporting on the basis of the technology that is available working from home. And this sounds funny. This sounds funny because journalists not going to the field but working from home. So the quality of product, quality of stories are bound to be affected. They are not up to the standard. So people have to realize that since most of the journalists are working from home these days, so we have to take the information, we have to read the stories, understanding the limitations they are working, these stories are worked from.
What is your take about the Prime Minister and ministers complain over media that media is not supporting the government fighting COVID-19 or this pandemic?
Well, I would not completely dismiss the kind of complaints that the public officials, including ministers and prime ministers, have, because, as I said, professionally, Nepal's several media outlets are still not reliable, I would say, and their criticism becomes a very stinging without providing without substantiating the arguments that have to come along with the questions. Very careless way and very general way questions are asked, not specific, and we have to admit our weaknesses and our mistakes as well. But having said that, the criticism from the public officials, including ministers and prime ministers, they are little exaggerated, and they are aimed at discouraging independent reporting, and from that basis we are working on a democratic setup, and there is a constitution which guarantees full press freedom. In the preamble of the constitution they have written full, you could say press freedom, but there is a word, adjective, full press freedom. So once you have commitment through constitution, and there are several other provisions in the constitution which guarantees free expression and free writing, independence of press, everything is there. So if that is violated, those provisions are violated, then the legal machinery, legal course will take, legal matters will take its own course. But then to condemn or to criticize journalists for doing what is not
being done in their favor,
not done in their favor, is not something that I would appreciate.
Well, Mr. Adhikary, there are many interesting issues, but we are coming to the end of the show. Could you very quickly touch upon how journalists can, combat with the disinformation? Plus anything that I have left to ask you very quickly.
Well, the only thing I come to say again and again and again is that stories are not fairy tales kind of stories, not in literature. Our stories are factual, have to be factual and facts based. So anything speculative, anything written or spoken on conjectures are not to be accepted by the society, or else we will be misleading the society. We have a great responsibility as journalists to lead or mislead. So we have to be extra careful these days, where stories are planted, concocted, created, invented. They are not facts, but we are often guided, persuaded, coerced by interested groups and persons to to report the issue as real stories. So we must not leave that whether those stories are true or not. Readers will definitely sort things out on their own, but then we should not leave those responsibilities to the reader solely. We have to do the sifting, we have to do the verification and those kind of things. Then only we can produce reliable stories and do a service to the journalism as a profession.
Well, Mr. Adhikary, thank you very much for joining us and sharing with your interesting insights.
Thank you for having me on.
Pleasure talking to you.
Thank you.
And dear audience, time now to wrap up the show. Keep watching us. See you next week. Namaste.